Let's cut to the chase, have an honest conversation, and develop real answers. As a matter of fact, with Andrew Cuomo. Hello, and welcome back to As a Matter of Fact. I'm Andrew Cuomo. Today, with so much going on, let's take the opportunity to get back to some of your questions. First question.
Yeah, hi. So there's been so much news about migrants crossing the border lately, but I feel like we're not getting the facts, not the true facts. What should the federal, state, and local governments be doing, and shouldn't we focus on affordable housing anyway?
First, there has been so much confusion and misinformation on this topic, it's frightening. I can see one of the reasons why the American people are so confused and frustrated. It depends on what newspaper you read, what TV station you listen to. Let's take a step back and actually talk facts. This is not just an immigration issue. The migrants who are approaching the border are primarily seeking asylum. Asylum is different. Asylum says you have the right to come into this country if you are a victim in your country of origin, political prosecution, etc. And you have a right to apply for asylum. And when you apply for asylum, you are then given a hearing date, and you have to appear at the hearing, and the decision is made at the hearing as to whether or not you will actually get asylum. Now, overwhelmingly, the asylum claims are denied. But this is about asylum. It is not immigrants coming to the border saying, I want to come in just because I want to live there. Two very different situations. The asylum claims have gone way up. Why? Two reasons. One, under Trump, there was no belief that you would be allowed into this country to seek asylum. It was Trump's position. It was the position of Title 42. But no one came to the border with a rational belief that they would be allowed in. Joe Biden, in the campaign, said, and I agree with the policy, we recognize asylum claims. It is a very important part of this nation and our Constitution and our history. When Joe Biden said that, the lines started to form, right? People heard the Biden position, and they started to literally make the movement towards the southern border. I've spoken to people, migrants who are in New York, in hotels, who say, we heard the position of President Biden, and we started the trek to the U.S. 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, paying coyotes, going through very dangerous situations, using their last pennies to get to the U.S. border. So that's the first thing that happened. Second, the number of asylum claims is up because many of the underlying conditions in many of these countries have gotten worse. The political prosecution has gotten worse. The crime has gotten worse. Kidnapping has gotten worse. Ransoms have gotten worse. The economy has gotten worse. So the conditions in the home countries have deteriorated, and that has brought more people to the border. Next point. Okay, so you have many people who you need to process through asylum. And this now becomes a major management operation. That's effectively what it is. And to me, it makes a broader point. The competence level of our government has dropped precipitously. At one time, this government was more competent. It could mobilize faster. It could organize faster. It had more talent. We are just not as competent as a government. We're much more political than we've ever been. but we're also much less functional and much less operational and much less competent. So you have people who want to come in to the country, the asylum seekers. They have to be tracked. They have to be scheduled for a hearing. You need to conduct a hearing. You need to house them during the period of time that it's going to require to have that hearing. Difficult operational task, but only an operational task, and something that we should have been much more competent at performing. The southern states, the border states, their complaint is there is no process in place, so the burden all falls to the border states. Because they cross the border, now they're in El Paso, they're in Texas, they're in Florida, etc. And the federal government, since they don't have the process, the mechanism in place, everything backs up on the southern borders. The Republican governors then, I think, as a disgraceful political charade, ship migrants throughout the country just to make their political point. And they use people as pawns. And these are human beings. And it was really one of the more despicable political acts. And I've seen a lot of despicable political acts. And then the level of incompetence of government compounds. So you have a problem at the border. They're then shipped to cities across the country. New York City, 60,000 migrants arrive. What is New York City to do? Now, cities are already in desperate shape. And I've spoken about this before. I want to speak more about it. We have an urban crisis. It is unrealized. It's also unaddressed. But in the midst of this urban crisis, 60,000 migrants are delivered to New York City. Now, from the mayor's point of view in these cities, this is not their issue. There is a delineation of responsibility among the different levels of government. Immigration is clearly a federal responsibility. Now, in this situation, if the federal government wants to say, well, we're going to organize the states to actually implement the instrumentality, fine. We've actually done that before. New York State worked with the federal government in prior administrations in taking asylum seekers, children, and housing them within the state. So we have done that before. But that hasn't happened here. They have been literally dropped into the cities. And in many cities, the states are totally ignoring the circumstance. First, this is one of the great political hypocrisies, because the Democrats gave great speeches, and I'm proud of them, that New York State is a sanctuary state. California is a sanctuary state. Meaning what? Meaning we believe in the concept of asylum and offering that assistance, and we will provide sanctuary. But now that there is a practical issue to perform, states have gone silent. And many cities themselves have been left to struggle. New York City, cost of about $1 billion per year. But the cost is not really even about the money. It is the practical effect on a city that is already struggling with homelessness, with commercial vacancies, with fewer people coming in to actually work. And now on top of that, you have the migrants in a bizarre circumstance where they have to wait a couple of years for a hearing, which is also a very disorganized process, and they can't work in the meantime. And you have to pay and house them. How is a city supposed to do this? I mean, it's a nearly impossible task. And what it's doing is it's taking these cities that are already under strain and stress, and visibly so, and making it worse. And you have cities talking about setting up tent cities, using armories, using parks, using warehouses to house migrants. The states should step in as the prime responders, not the cities. New York State, for example, should step in and say, people are not entering New York City. People are entering New York State. Yes, New York City is a sanctuary city. New York State is a sanctuary state. A city is a creature of state law. Mayors don't like to hear that fact. It bristles. But it's a fact. The state law created the city. The state is the responsible entity. The state also has more land, by definition, more resources, more options. So, people are entering New York City. New York State should say, that's our responsibility. And New York State is a big state. And we said New York State is a sanctuary state. So we will distribute the migrants across the state. If you want to keep it simple, make it proportionate. New York City is X percent of the population. They take X percent of the migrants. Nassau County, Suffolk County, Erie County, etc. Do it proportionately. Do it however you want. But do it. The states have turned their back. Many states, not all states. New York State has turned its back on the migrant issue. Why? Because it's operational and it's difficult and it's political. So they would rather wash their hands of it. That's not government. That's not government. And who do you think you're fooling? This is New York City's problem, but it's not the state's problem. It's not the state legislature's fault that all of this hardship has fallen on New York City. Do you think New Yorkers are that ignorant? Do you really believe that? They're not. And it's going to be another reason why people are disgusted with government. Now, what this could be, take a negative, make it a positive. Okay, we have 60,000 people to house. By the way, this is just pointing to a problem that we already had, which is a tremendous lack of affordable housing. The affordable housing burden can be met. We just have to be a little bit more creative. Let's use the migrant crisis as the opportunity to revisit the overall affordable housing crisis. We have the federal government that is involved because it's immigration. Let's focus first on the nation's public housing system. I was HUD secretary. Part of HUD's responsibility was running public housing all across the country, public housing authorities. Here in New York City, it's called NYCHA, but every city, state has a public housing authority. The condition of public housing is deplorable. We have tens of thousands of units of vacant public housing that are waiting for renovation. If they were renovated, they would then be habitable. Attack that problem now. Send the federal funds, accelerate the requirements and red tape on the reconditioning of these units, and let's get those units back online. We should have done it anyway. Reissue Section 8 vouchers. which was a very successful program for many, many years. And literally the waiting lines for Section 8s have been closed for decades. Let the federal government reissue Section 8 vouchers. Let's get creative and take the vacancies in the commercial units, which are going to be a major drain on this economy. Mark my words. Commercial buildings have significant vacancy issues, and they are going to continue. Get creative. What commercial vacant space can be converted to residential? And let's make those zoning changes and those building code requirements quickly to actually do it. But the overall point is, yes, we have an operational problem. Run towards it, not away from it. Seize it. Government is about performance. It's not about this blather we hear in Washington day in and day out. You want people to trust government? Show them government can actually do something. Show people the operational capacity for change and give them the hope of a better future. That's what should be happening with this migrant crisis. Don't run from it, governors. Don't run from it. There is no running from it. Don't run from it, Congress. Don't run from it, President Biden. There's no running from it. And mayors, make your voice heard. Demand the federal government and the state governments come to the table. This is going to be going on for a long time. And we will keep talking about it until someone finally does something about it. Let's go to the next question.
Hello, Governor. I work in New York City, and I have for years, and needless to say, it isn't what it used to be at all. So many of the stores have closed, and it just feels like the number of homeless people on the streets is growing and growing. I also don't feel as safe as I used to, even during the day. My question for you is, do you think New York will ever make a full comeback?
Good question. One of my most fascinating jobs was as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, working with all the different cities and states all across the country and seeing the variety. Cities are constantly evolving. Cities were designed and organized because that's where the jobs were. That's where the factories were. The factory was located next to a river. The river is how the factory got the goods and moved the goods. Factories required large number of employees. People needed to live near the place they worked. That was yesterday. Today, post-COVID, I have my laptop, I can Zoom, I can be anywhere. Well, once every 2 weeks, they want me to come into the office for a meeting. Fine, I'll get on a plane and I'll fly to that city once every 2 weeks. Especially the more wealthy people have the economic ability to make that flexibility a reality. That is happening. That is going to continue to happen. I like to use the expression, people will have to want to live in a city, which is a different mindset. In the past, you endured the city. I have to sit in traffic for an hour to get to work. I have to get on that subway and it's late and it's dirty and it's noisy, but I have to do it. Now you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. So you're going to need to want to go into the city. And that is a different mindset for the city management and a higher bar, by the way. But you will see the revenues fall off. And I think the reality is not set in for local governments. Why? Because if you were honest, you would have said to the people of your city or your state, look, it's a different day. We don't have the revenues, and we can't count on the revenues that we've had in the past. The preceding couple of years, local governments were sustained by the massive federal money that was sent to local governments during COVID. And it was massive. And that infusion of federal money papered over many of the chronic underlying economic problems. So they lived off what they call a one-shot. Federal government said, here's 10 billion to get you through COVID. The 10 billion covered the hole in the budget for the past few years. But the numbers were dropping. 500,000 people left New York. The 500,000 people were the 500,000 wealthiest people. The wealthiest people paid most of the taxes. So not only is it 500,000, it's 500,000 of your largest taxpayers. And now what's happening is you're going to see the truth because the numbers don't lie. And at one point, you can't hide from the numbers. There was a recent report that the revenue in New York State dropped 39% in the beginning of this year. January to April. April is when the tax receipts come in. So it's the first time you get a sense of where you really are. 39% drop in revenue. Katie bar the door. That is an insurmountable budget hole. You don't make up a 39% drop here and there. If they were honest, the budgets were just done in many states and in many cities. If a governor was honest and responsible, if a mayor was honest and responsible right now, they would have to seriously consider calling back their city council or their legislature and say, we have to revisit the budget. I did this a number of times because you do a budget on a set of assumptions. If the assumptions change, you have to come back and change the spending plan. Once you know the revenues are down, you can't continue to spend money that you know you're not going to collect, right? Wage earner in a family was making $50,000 a year. So there was a budget where you were going to live on $50,000 a year. You find out in April, the boss says, this year it's not 50. This year it's $30,000 that you're going to get paid. Well, you can't ignore that. You have to make the adjustment now. Because if you continue to spend at the rate as if you were making $50,000, you're digging a deeper and deeper hole. Will governors and mayors do it? No. Why? Because we are in a period where the politics is so intense and people have such strong opinions. Politicians are paralyzed. They're afraid to act because they're going to get criticized. But what I learned is you're going to get criticized anyway. So do the right thing. Do the responsible thing. I also learned denying a problem only makes it worse. state controller announces that revenues are down 39%. You must act. It would be negligent not to act. And if you don't act, there's always a consequence. Not only will you have a bigger budget hole, but the credit rating agencies, who are they? They are these people who analyze the state's finances and give the state a credit rating. They are watching. The analysts watch, just as they downgrade a stock in a private corporation. They can downgrade the credit rating in a government. So if the government isn't acting prudently from a fiscal point of view, you can see those credit rating agencies come in and downgrade your credit. And now you made a bad situation much, much worse. So what is going to be interesting to see is how well this nation addresses this problem. You have urban crisis caused by post-COVID, financial realities, homelessness, crime, and a higher tax burden in urban areas. So they are just not as competitive economically anymore. You put all of those things together, it's a difficult picture. One last point. You have that situation, the finances, the homeless, the crime, the taxes, compounded by a very difficult political situation where you have these political extremes. In cities, they tend to be the far left, but you have political extremes that make it very, very difficult to govern responsibly. And have frightened politicians into doing really dumb things in some cases, or have frightened politicians into paralysis. So, for example, a governor is told you have 39% reduction in revenues, or a mayor is told that. Prudence says, bring back the legislature, start to make the adjustments. Far left is going to say, can't cut anything. Don't cut. Don't cut. Don't cut any government services. Raise taxes to make up for the shortfall. The fiscal people, the financial people will say, if you raise taxes, you're going to chase more people from the city. That's why we have the drop in revenue in the first place. And if you chase more people from the city, you're not going to get more revenue. You're actually going to get less revenue. This is a difficult situation. Politicians, avoid difficult situations. Avoid difficult choices. That's what they think it means to be an elected leader. They are exactly wrong. You avoid the difficult issues, they compound. They compound, and they get worse. But everybody has to learn that for themselves. And some people, frankly, just don't have the constitution to lead. I've learned that. Everybody thinks, I want to be the governor, I want to be the mayor, I want to be the speaker of the legislature. You want to be a speaker of the legislature? Do you have the character and the constitution and the personality to go look at your conference and say, I know this is what you want, I know this is not what you want, but this is the right thing to do, and we're going to do it? Do you have that fortitude? Many people think they do, but I can tell you this, it is much harder done than said. And leadership during difficult times really is a stressful, personally draining and fatiguing experience. When things are going great, it's nice to be an executive. You're at the head of the parade, and the parade, everybody's happy. In tough times, when the news is all bad and the decisions are all tough, that's the judge of a leader. That's the judge of a leader. Next question, please.
Hi, Governor. My question is, where do you record your podcast? I noticed that you have a new background, and I'm actually interested to know more about the items that you have on the shelves behind you. Could you talk about some of the photos and the souvenirs?
Okay, that is a kind of different question. Let me summarize if I can. Where am I physically, and what are the things around me and behind me? I am in my home in Westchester County, New York. That's where we are filming this. I film it at different places, and you've probably noticed the backdrop changes. Sometimes we do it in the studio, sometimes we do it in different places. But this is my home. This is my home office. And these are just mementos, artifacts that I have in my office. To my left, bottom picture is my father and myself playing basketball in the executive mansion in Albany. Was one of my father's first additions at the mansion was he wanted a basketball hoop up. He loved playing basketball. He loved the competition of it. And my father was a very physical player. He was very good, very strong, very athletic. And you knew after you played a few games. I wish I had a dime for every stitch that I received after a basketball game with my father. But those are some of my fondest memories. Above that picture, that's Cara and Michaela holding a paddle. The paddle is a wooden paddle that says the Adirondack Challenge. Adirondacks, upstate New York. As you know, the Adirondack Park, one of the real treasures in this nation. We would do once a year what we call the Adirondack Challenge, and we would have a weekend, and we would use it to showcase all the attractions in the Adirondacks. And one of the highlights was a whitewater rafting race. And we would have teams, and we would have the race, and you'd win a trophy, and you'd get a memento of a paddle. We won that year. We won the paddle. There were many complaints because it was a timed race, and people suggested that as the timekeeper was a state employee, that the state employees had a benefit in the race. I assured them that the time was the time. But I think they were a little quizzical about it. To my right, the orange football was a memento from Camp David during my days in the Clinton administration. Camp David is a retreat that the president uses, and when I was in the cabinet, and they would have weekend retreats to discuss policy, etc., and that's one of the mementos from there. The other football is assigned Jets football. I was a Queens boy. When you grow up in Queens, I grew up right behind what they called Shea Stadium. Shea Stadium is where the Jets played. Queens was the Jets and the Mets, two of the newer franchises. But that was a signed ball that I got very young, which was a prized possession. Buffalo Bills helmet. I also have a Jets helmet. I have a Giants helmet. They're just not all there. But the Buffalo Bills were we spent a lot of time in Buffalo, and we almost lost the Buffalo Bills. They were going to move at one time, and it was quite a traumatic possibility, and we worked very hard, and we were successful in keeping the Bills in Buffalo. If they had left, it would have really hurt Buffalo. Buffalo is one of those towns where they don't have that many sports teams. Downstate New York, you have 3 football teams. But if you had lost the Buffalo Bills, it would have really hurt Buffalo. And we had invested a lot of money in Buffalo, and Buffalo was markedly coming back. Home prices were up, the businesses were moving in. So keeping the Buffalo Bills were special. I don't know what other pictures you can see from there. We have the 9/11 bandana. We would do a motorcycle ride every 9/11 to honor the people we lost in 9/11, and a motorcycle ride was one of the things that we would do. That's a picture of that motorcycle ride. We have a Harley Davidson, early Harley Davidson model. I'm a Harley Davidson rider, also ride other bikes, but I like Harleys. We have a 57 Chevy model car that we got from Cuba. I brought a delegation to Cuba, and that's a memento from there. So just mementos from various experiences at HUD as Attorney General, and things that make me remember. On my desk, paperweight, accept the fact that some days you are the pigeon and some days you are the statue. Those are words to live by. Good to be with you. Have a good week, and I'll see you next week.